The Indiana Fever just locked in their final 2026 roster, and Caitlin Clark fans are losing their minds right now, and honestly they have every right to be. The front office had a chance to fix the one glaring problem that showed up in all 3 preseason games. A lack of floor spacing from the forward spots, and instead they handed the last roster spot to another guard. Meanwhile, Justine Pisset, a 6 feet 4 inches in sharpshooter with a 7-foot wingspan who was literally built for this team, is now reportedly injured, relegated to a development contract in order to make space for another small guard that will end up riding the bench anyway. Is the Indiana Fever front office really serious about winning a championship? Let me know down in the comments below. Yeah. Yikes. That's all I got to say. Caitlin Clark fans showing no mercy whatsoever. Right? Fans are going to feel the way they want to feel, and that's what they deserve to feel. Right? Sports fans are vocal. Sports fans are loud. And I swear to God, there is a fraction, I guess it's the old WNBA fans, that are completely clueless on actual sports. 3 preseason games exposed everything an opposing coach needs to know on how to beat the Indiana Fever this year. Every single opponent figured out the same thing almost immediately and just kept doing it over and over, and Indiana had no answer. The New York Liberty, the Dallas Wings, the Nigerian national team, all 3 ran basically the same defense. They collapsed the paint, left Indiana's forwards wide open on the perimeter, and just dared those forwards to beat them from the outside. And here's why that worked so easily. Aliyah Boston, Myisha Hines-Allen, Monique Billings, Michaela Timson, and Darius Dantes are all traditional bigs who don't shoot threes. Not a single one of them makes a defender nervous standing on the 3-point line. So defenders don't even have to think about closing out on them. They just stay home in the paint and wait. In which the Indiana Fever, preseason or not, got absolutely crushed by what we believe is going to be one of the worst teams in the league. But I got to tell you, when it was starters versus starters, it didn't turn out so well. It did not turn out so well. And many fans today are screaming from the top of the mountain what they've been saying since the draft. We got absolutely destroyed on the boards last night. Destroyed. When that happens, the whole offense breaks down fast. Clark drives and runs into a wall of bodies because there's no space to attack. Boston catches the ball in the post and immediately gets doubled because the Liberty, for example, knew that nobody on the perimeter was going to punish them for leaving their matchup against the Liberty. That's exactly what kept happening. Boston getting the ball, 2 defenders already there and nowhere to go. The Wings game had a different kind of ugly to it. Dallas dominated the glass by 19 rebounds. And part of that is directly connected to the spacing problem, because when none of your forwards are pulling defenders out to the perimeter, everyone ends up crammed in the same 10-foot area around the basket. So when a shot goes up, Indiana's bigs are already fighting through a crowd that shouldn't be that crowded. Coach Stephanie White didn't sugarcoat it after the game either, saying the Fever got out-toughed and that Dallas just had a different level of urgency. Indiana also turned the ball over 17 times in that game, which Dallas converted into 42 free throw attempts. That's not a hustle problem. That's a structural one. You have to have somebody at that 4 and 5 that is stretching the floor. All right? That's why I say all that. You have to have somebody at that 4 and 5 to stretch that floor, because the WNBA is literally turning into the NBA. It literally is, man. It's just too much talent to have bigs on the floor together that can't shoot. It's too much talent for that. The defense can just clog that paint, as we saw last night, as we saw last year. You know, it's going to continue to happen. The Nigeria game though gave a glimpse of something. Darius Dantes went 4 for 6 from 3, and the second defenders had to respect her range. Driving lanes opened up that were completely closed in the other 2 games. One forward shooting from outside literally changed the geometry of the offense. And that's not an accident. So, this isn't a spacing problem you can scheme your way out of with better play design. Play design only works if you have the right players to run it. Indiana doesn't have a forward who can shoot threes on a guaranteed contract right now. And that's a roster construction problem, which means it follows you into every single game, no matter what plays you draw up. Tall enough to go up against some of these better teams. The answer that I see, and I have been saying this all off-season, we need more.
We need more size. We need an adequate backup to AB. We need a starting caliber power forward. And the Indiana Fever and the Indiana Fever media, they're running cover for this Justine Pisset injury. Justine Pisset comes out and says, "Don't believe everything the media says." The final roster dropped and the first thing fans noticed was the guard count. 7 guards on a 12-person roster, and the front court spacing problem that showed up in all 3 preseason games just sat there completely untouched. Our opening night roster is set. This just dropped. Just dropped. Kelsey Mitchell, Hines-Allen, Raven Johnson, Aliyah Boston, Sophie Cunningham, Lexi Hall, Darius Dantes, Justine Pat, Michaela Timson, Caitlin Clark, Monique Billings, Shaturi Walker, Kimbrough, and Ty Harris. That is your opening night 2026 roster right there. Right there. Championship season with the length on this team. We shall see. Coach Stephanie White has been pretty open about wanting Clark to play more off the ball, and she's even talked about sliding Clark into a small forward role at times. White's stated goal is to get Clark into the second or third action of a possession rather than having her initiate everything herself, which sounds creative on paper, but causes a real problem in practice. Clark's entire game runs on pace. She pushes in transition before defenses can set. She creates off movement as a ball handler and she punishes teams who aren't ready for her yet. Asking her to wait for the second or third action of a possession is asking her to operate in exactly the spots where defenses are already organized and waiting. Clark pushed back and she didn't hedge. "I'm the best transition player in the league," she said. And she's not wrong. "I think mostly on dead balls. Like I'm the best, I think I'm the best transition player in the league. That's where I thrive. Everybody knows that's my game. So, getting the ball off of rebound or in transition, like that's probably when I'm going to be the primary ball handler more than anything." And then, she did acknowledge the off-ball concept, actually comparing it to how the Golden State Warriors use Steph Curry, where moving without the ball forces defenders to track you everywhere. But notice how she framed it as a weapon you add, not a role you replace everything else with. White seems to want it as the foundation. Clark wants it as one tool in a much bigger kit. And honestly, off-ball Clark can work because her shooting is real and defenses do have to chase her off screens. The catch is that off-ball Clark only functions if the other players on the floor can actually threaten defenses enough to create the movement she needs. Right now, Indiana's forwards can't do that. So, you'd be running an off-ball system without the spacing to make it breathe. I swear to God, if y'all keep Darius Dantes and cut Justine Pisset, y'all are so damn incompetent. Woo. Fire the Fever front office and Stephanie White. It is going down. That was painful to watch. I hope Cease was not re-injured. And you want to sell tickets? Nobody wants to watch Stephanie White's show. So, what you actually have is Clark wanting to run, White wanting her to operate in set actions, and a roster that can't cleanly execute either version because the floor never opens up the way it needs to. 7 guards means Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, Sophie Cunningham, and Lexi Hull are all on the floor needing the ball in their hands at different moments, and someone is always going to be standing somewhere that doesn't make sense for them. That log jam doesn't get solved by better rotations or smarter substitutions. It's baked into the roster. And the part that makes fans genuinely angry isn't the philosophy debate between Clark and White. It's that Indiana used the last roster spot on a 5 feet 8 inches in guard who doesn't fill any gap that wasn't already filled, while a 6 feet 4 inches in shooter with a 7-foot wingspan who could have fixed the spacing problem entirely ended up on a development contract. Like, I don't think people understand 6 feet 4 inches snipers don't grow on trees. Justine Pat went 25th overall in the draft and Indiana picked her because she's a 6 feet 4 inches in forward who shot 42.2% from 3 at Vanderbilt on 6.6 attempts per game, which ranked 7th in all of women's college basketball that year. That's not a player who occasionally steps out to the perimeter. That's a player who lives there. And scouts coming out of the draft called her jump shot one of the purest in the entire class. On top of that, she's got a 7-foot wingspan, which means she can shoot over smaller defenders who try to contest her and switch onto guards on defense without giving up a size mismatch. At Vanderbilt, she wasn't just spotting up in the corner either. She moved. She defended multiple positions because of her length, and college defenses genuinely couldn't ignore her on the perimeter, which is exactly what Indiana's been missing at the 4 spot. When a forward commands that kind of defensive attention from outside the arc, the paint opens. Boston gets her post catches without a second defender already waiting. Clark gets downhill lanes that aren't clogged before she even gets there. Justine Pat is huge. Like, if you've been looking at any of your drills, Justine Pat is huge. The Liberty preseason game showed all of this in real time. Pisset played 10 minutes, scored 8 points, and hit 2 of her 3 3-point attempts against a team with real length and real defensive players. Aliyah Boston noticed it immediately after the game, saying that having a post player who can shoot changes the geometry of the whole offense because defenses suddenly have to respect the perimeter. Boston felt the difference firsthand. So, what did Indiana do? They put Pisset on a development contract and gave the last roster spot to Shaturi Walker Kimbrough, a 5 feet 8 inches in guard who spent most of her career at the end of benches and doesn't fill any gap on this roster that wasn't already covered multiple times over. That's not a basketball decision. It reads like Kelly Krakoff and Amber Cox protecting a veteran relationship while a rookie who actually solves a real problem gets pushed to the margins. I feel like the Indiana Fever are lying about Justine Pat's leg injury. I feel like they are hiding her because they don't want to commit to giving her a fuller contract to be on the 12-player roster. They want her to be on that developmental contract. And I think that they know after that Game 1 versus New York, they know that if this girl continues to log minutes in these games, somebody is going to covet her. Somebody is going to snatch her off of. And now Pat is reportedly injured. Except the timeline on that injury is vague enough that fans started asking questions pretty fast. Then Pat herself broke her silence and told people not to believe everything being reported. That's a pretty specific thing to say if you're just dealing with a routine injury and the organization is being straight with you. You don't say that unless the story being told about you isn't your story. The pattern here is hard to ignore. Development contract for the rookie who fills a real need, a standard contract for the veteran who doesn't, a vague injury report, and then the player publicly questioning the narrative. If Pat ends up on waivers, she won't last 24 hours before another team claims her. I feel like they are lying about this injury because they are hiding her. I just got to keep it real. I got to keep it real. And let's take a look at what Justine Pat also had to say. She said, "Let's not always believe the media with the puzzle face." Now, I don't know necessarily what she means by this, but she could be saying, "Hey, we can't believe what the Fever putting out there in the media. I'm fine. I can play. She came out.
She came out and let us know. I don't care about no developmental contract." Set the frustration aside for a second and just look at what Indiana actually has, because Clark and Boston together are as good a 1-2 punch as anyone in the league can put out there right now. Kelsey Mitchell can get her own shot off the dribble against almost any guard in the league. Lexi Hall defends and moves without the ball. And Sophie Cunningham brings toughness and shooting off the bench. That's a real perimeter group. Raven Johnson showed up in the Nigeria game with 5 steals and 5 assists. And she looked like exactly the kind of player Clark needs next to her in transition. Someone who can pressure the ball, create turnovers, and push the pace before defenses get organized. The bench isn't empty. There are real players here. What is going on? Really? Ticket sales plummeted since she came to Indiana. The fans have spoken. They don't like the lies from the front office or the questionable figures like Stephanie. Boy, got to be more careful. I mean it. Yeah, I got to tell you. And the Liberty preseason win proved the ceiling is legitimate because Indiana beat the perceived championship favorite by 18 points without Boston and Hall even suiting up. Kelsey Mitchell and Chaturi Walker-Kimbrough tied for the team's scoring lead, and Indiana turned 24 Liberty turnovers into 29 points. That's not luck. That's a team that can genuinely fly in transition when the pieces click. The problem isn't talent. Good players in the wrong structure still don't produce good basketball. And right now, Indiana's structure asks Boston to anchor the post in a paint that never clears. Asks Clark to be a transition engine in a lineup that can't give her open lanes, and asks the forwards to stretch the floor when they're not built to do it. None of those players are failing. The structure is failing them. Some could say that Stephanie White's playing defense on her own player. God, White is not a coach. I would put that there. They run outdated plays, and it shows they will not play Clark in the position that she was made for. Off ball again in what World Cup CC nowhere to get away from boring basketball. One stretch 4 fixes most of this. When a forward shoots threes well enough that defenders can't leave her, the paint opens for Boston's post-game, Clark gets downhill lanes that aren't already packed with bodies, and the guards around them get kick-out looks they can actually convert. That's not a complicated solution. It's one player doing one specific thing that nobody on the current guaranteed contract roster can do. White's system and Clark's transition game aren't actually incompatible either. Clark cutting off ball and Clark pushing pace in transition can coexist on the same team, but only if the floor is spaced enough to make both work at the same time. Right now, it isn't. So, the two approaches end up competing with each other instead of feeding each other. I tell you, a fan base is fully alert and awake. Fully alert and awake. They are seeing what's going on. Fans are smart. They are not dumb. They deserve to feel how they want to feel. Plain and simple. Clark winning MVP in 2026 isn't a stretch. She's got the skill, the platform, and enough supporting talent around her to make a real run at it. But MVP numbers come from efficiency, and efficiency comes from spacing. And spacing comes from a stretch 4 that Indiana doesn't currently have on a guaranteed contract. Krakoff and Cox already watched the preseason tape. They already know exactly what it showed them about their own team. Pat already told people her goal is to make a 12-player roster. And she was careful not to say that roster has to be Indiana's. That's not an accident. That's a 6 feet 4 inches in shooter with a 7-foot wingspan, letting every other team in the league know she's available. And teams like the Portland Fire and Washington Mystics are absolutely paying attention. Indiana's development contract only gives them a 14-day exclusivity window before any team can walk up and offer Pat at a standard deal, forcing the Fever to match it or watch her walk. Is the Indiana Fever front office really serious about winning a championship? Caitlin Clark fans are absolutely furious right now, and honestly, you can understand why. The Indiana Fever finalized their 2026 roster, but instead of fixing the biggest issue that showed up throughout the preseason, they doubled down on it. Fans watched 3 games where the exact same weakness got exposed over and over again, yet the front office still chose to keep another guard instead of adding real size and shooting in the front court. That decision has sparked a massive debate about whether this team is actually built to compete for a championship. The biggest problem is simple. Indiana does not have enough floor spacing from the forward positions. Every preseason opponent figured it out immediately. The New York Liberty, the Dallas Wings, and even the Nigerian national team all used basically the same defensive strategy. They packed the paint, ignored Indiana's forwards on the perimeter, and dared them to shoot. Why? Because most of Indiana's bigs are traditional interior players who don't consistently stretch the floor. Defenders don't respect them outside the arc, so they stay near the basket and clog every driving lane. That creates a domino effect across the entire offense. Caitlin Clark thrives in transition and attacking downhill, but when the paint is crowded with defenders, those lanes disappear before she even gets moving. Aliyah Boston faces the same issue in the post. Every time she catches the ball inside, another defender immediately collapses because opponents know Indiana's forwards aren't likely to punish them from outside. Instead of operating in space, Clark and Boston are constantly dealing with traffic. The Dallas preseason game highlighted this problem perfectly. Indiana got crushed on the boards and looked overwhelmed physically. When a team can crowd the paint without worrying about perimeter shooting from your front court, rebounding becomes even harder because everyone is battling in the same area around the rim. The Fever also turned the ball over repeatedly, which led to easy transition opportunities and free throws for Dallas. It wasn't just an effort issue. It looked like a structural roster issue. That's why so many fans are frustrated about the situation involving Justine Pisset. She's exactly the type of player many believe Indiana desperately needs. A 6 feet 4 inches forward with a long wingspan and legitimate three-point shooting ability is rare, especially for a team trying to maximize a superstar playmaker like Caitlin Clark. Pisset shot over 42% from 3 in college while taking a high volume of attempts, meaning she isn't just a spot-up shooter hiding in the corner. She's a real perimeter threat. And when she played during the preseason, the difference was noticeable. Defenders had to respect her shooting, which immediately opened up driving lanes and spacing opportunities for the rest of the offense. Boston herself mentioned how much easier the floor looked with a stretch forward pulling defenders away from the paint. That's exactly what Indiana has been missing. Instead of giving Pisset a guaranteed roster spot, though, Indiana reportedly placed her on a developmental contract while keeping another guard on the roster. That decision immediately caused backlash because the Fever already have a crowded backcourt rotation. Fans are questioning why the team would prioritize another small guard when the frontcourt spacing issue was so obvious throughout preseason play. Things became even more controversial after reports surfaced about Pisset dealing with an injury. Fans started questioning the situation almost immediately because the details surrounding the injury were vague. Then Pisset herself posted comments online suggesting people should not believe everything they hear from the media. That only fueled speculation that Indiana may be trying to stash her on a developmental deal instead of fully committing to her.